All right, strap yourselves in for today's deep dive.
Oh.
We're going to be jumping headfirst into the world of performance and how to conquer.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
That fear that creeps in when
Right.
the spotlight hits you.
Okay.
And get this.
Hmm.
Our source material today kicks off with a pretty wild image.
Oh.
We're talking Winston Churchill,
Okay.
a bathtub,
Interesting.
and a bombing raid.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
a combination.
Right. Talk about a recipe for either a relaxing evening or just sheer terror.
I can imagine.
But the source material uses this crazy image.
Churchill in the bathtub?
Yes.
Okay.
To really drive home a point about fear.
I see.
If you're not sweating bullets in that scenario,
Right.
are you even human?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say most of us would be feeling a little bit anxious in that situation.
So it's a striking image, for sure.
Yeah.
And,
it really...
the text kind of uses it to explore how we often see fear as this big, overwhelming abstract force.
Yeah, this like nebulous thing that we don't quite understand.
Right.
And that can just completely control us.
And instead of, kind of cowering, hiding away, the source material is encouraging us to confront that fear head on.
So no more hiding under the covers when
what's
stage fright kicks in.
Exactly.
Or face it head on.
Face it head on. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, I like that.
So the text argues that by kind of turning fear into a character, into an opponent, that we can actually start to challenge it.
All right, so you're saying...
and take back control.
We should personify this fear.
Yeah.
Make it something we can actually interact with.
Exactly. And it even suggests, like, talking back to fear.
Oh, interesting.
Almost like...
like having a conversation.
Yes, like a verbal scarring match.
That's an interesting concept.
Right.
So I'm guessing this isn't like giving fear a pep talk or anything.
No, not at all.
Or like, it's more like, a witty comeback or putting it in its place.
Exactly.
Oh, okay, got it.
The source material even gives some 20 funny examples.
Oh, I'd love to hear some.
Yeah, we'll get into those a bit later.
Okay.
But it's all about reframing fear as something that we can actually address and manage instead of letting it just completely control us.
So instead of thinking, oh, no, I'm going to totally bomb this performance, I should be thinking more like...
Yeah, more like, hey, fear, nice try, but I've got this. You're just jealous of my spotlight.
I like that. It's a good way to kind of shift your perspective on it. And this idea of externalizing a fear, does that actually help us?
Yeah, so the text suggests that when we externalize it, when we make it this outside thing, we can start to break it down, and really understand where it's coming from.
So it's like taking the monster out from under the bed.
Exactly.
And realizing it's just a dust bunny.
It's all about perspective.
Right. It's not as scary as it seems.
And, a lot of the time, our fears are coming from these imagined scenarios.
Imagined scenarios.
Yeah, and negative self-talk.
Yeah. We're often our own worst critics.
Oh, absolutely, aren't we? So by addressing those head on, we can really start to take away fear's power.
Okay, so it's about taking control
Absolutely.
to not letting those anxieties run the show.
Yeah, no more letting those pre-performance jitters hijack our mojo.
I love that.
We're taking back the stage.
We're taking back the stage.
Okay, so now I'm starting to see how this whole bathtub warrior Churchill ties into all of this.
Okay.
But then the source material takes this really interesting leap and compares poetry slam to, wait for it.
All right, I'm waiting politics and war. Politics and war?
You read that, right?
Wow, that's a pretty bold comparison.
The text is arguing that poetry slam, just like these high-stakes arenas, is a battle fought with words.
I see.
It's about using language to persuade, to provoke, and ultimately to win over that audience.
So it's like a verbal boxing match.
Exactly.
But with rhymes and metaphors instead of jabs.
Right. So the text is highlighting how poetry slam involves a really strategic use of language, powerful delivery, and just a deep understanding of how to engage that audience.
Yeah, because you're not just up there reciting pretty words.
No, it's more than that.
You're trying to actually connect with people, make them feel something.
It's about using language as this tool to connect, challenge, and move people. But hold on a second. Isn't poetry supposed to be about expressing yourself?
Yeah, that's what I always thought.
Not conquering your audience.
It's about sharing your voice, your experiences, your emotions.
So does this verbal warfare metaphor take things a bit too far?
That's an interesting question.
It is. And the text actually acknowledges that sometimes that competitive aspect of poetry slam can overshadow the art form's core purpose.
Right.
But it argues. Yeah, that by embracing that challenge, by pushing ourselves to really hone our craft and deliver these impactful performances that we can actually elevate not only our own work, but the entire art form as a whole.
So it's not about being a ruthless, word-wielding tyrant.
No, not at all.
But about pushing ourselves to be better communicators.
Yes.
And storytellers. Okay, I'm starting to see the method behind this verbal warfare madness.
It's about channeling that nervous energy into something really powerful and engaging.
And impactful.
Yeah, so
but
I gotta say, the language that's used in the source material is...
It's a little intense.
Yeah, pretty intense. Words like assassination and word killer.
Yeah, those are pretty strong words.
Do you think that kind of aggressive framing is actually helpful?
Well, it's definitely...
It's for aspiring poets.
Provocative?
Right.
I think it depends on the individual. For some people, that strong language might actually be motivating.
Oh, interesting.
It might fire them up, make them feel empowered.
Right.
But for others, it could be intimidating.
Sure.
Or even off-putting.
Like, do you need to channel your inner warrior to be a good poet?
That's an interesting question.
It is. And, you know...
I think it's important to remember that at its core, poetry is about self-expression.
Yes, it's about sharing your voice.
Exactly.
Your experience.
Your unique perspective.
Your emotions.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always have to be a battle.
Not necessarily. All right, so...
Speaking of delving deeper into this material...
Our source material also happens to be promoting a book.
A book?
Yes. And it's called Poetry Master.
Poetry Master.
And its build is like the ultimate guide to mastering this art of verbal warfare.
So they're really leaning into this warrior poet?
They're going all in. Imagery, I have to admit. The marketing's pretty over the top.
Oh, I bet.
But it definitely grabs your attention.
I can imagine.
Like they took all the best or worst, depending on how you look at it, tactics from like a used car dealership and just cranked the volume up to 11.
Okay, so what are some of the claims they're making?
Well, they say things like...
unleash your inner beast. Dominate the stage with words that slice like a razor.
Wow. That's pretty intense.
Who wouldn't be terrified?
No, but I'd be a little intimidated.
To step on stage after reading that.
Yeah, maybe they're going for the shock and awe approach. I'm not sure.
So is that really the key to activating an audience?
You know, it's an interesting question.
Being a wordsmith warrior.
While I admire the book's confidence, I'm not convinced that aggression is always the answer.
Okay.
Confidence and stage presence are definitely crucial.
Yeah.
But there's a fine line between commanding attention and just coming across as a jerk.
Nobody wants to feel like they're on the receiving end of a verbal beatdown.
Even if the rhymes are killer.
Exactly.
That it's important to remember that everyone connects with poetry in different ways.
It's such a personal experience.
So that might resonate with one person.
Exactly.
Might completely turn off another.
So maybe the real secret art here isn't about being a verbal ninja warrior.
Okay.
But about finding your own style.
Your own voice, your own way of expressing yourself.
And connecting with your audience.
Right.
Authentically.
I think you're definitely onto something there.
It's less about conquering.
Less about conquering.
And more about inviting them into your world.
Yeah.
Making them feel something, think differently.
Challenging their perspectives.
Challenging their perspectives, yeah.
That's what makes poetry so powerful.
Exactly.
Its ability to connect us through those shared experiences and emotions.
Now let's talk a bit about the structure of poetry slams.
Okay.
Could you give our listeners a quick rundown of how they actually work?
Of course.
Because it seems like the source material is assuming everyone's already a slam poetry aficionado.
Right.
And...
Well, in a nutshell, poetry slams are these competitive events where poets perform their original work in front of an audience and a panel of judges.
So these judges involved?
Yes.
Okay.
And they're judged on a variety of factors.
Like what?
Like content, originality, and their delivery.
So it's not just about stringing together some fancy words.
It's not just about pretty language.
There's a real art to crafting and performing slam.
But that's where Poetry Master attempts to offer some guidance.
Okay.
Although,
as we've been talking about,
their advice is often couched in this very aggressive verbal warfare language.
All right, so let's get back to this Poetry Master phenomenon.
Okay.
Is this book actually worth checking out?
That's the big question.
Or is it all just hype?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily call it the holy grail of poetry, but it does offer some interesting insights.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, it delves into the mechanics of writing and performing slam poetry.
Okay.
And covers topics like structuring your poems.
Makes sense.
developing that stage presence and connecting with your audience.
So it's not all about being a lyrical assassin.
Not entirely,
no.
Well, it definitely emphasizes the competitive side of slam poetry. It also acknowledges the importance of vulnerability, authenticity, and connecting with your audience on an emotional level.
So there's more to it than meets the eye.
I think so.
It's not all about verbal combat and lyrical takedowns.
But I'm still not convinced.
Yeah, me neither.
That this whole word killer approach is the most effective way to win over an audience.
It just doesn't sit quite right.
I agree.
But I guess the book's underlying message about confidence and self-expression and pushing those creative boundaries
I think that part
has some merit.
So maybe it's not about becoming a poetry warrior. More about finding your own voice.
Yes.
And using it to really connect with others. In a meaningful way.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
And I think that's what we're really...
And I think that's the true essence of poetry. Regardless of whether it's performed on a slam stage or shared quietly in a journal.
Exactly.
It's about that connection. All right, so before we get too lost in the poetic wilderness... Let's circle back to this whole fear as an opponent concept. You mentioned earlier that the source material... suggests some specific techniques for dealing with performance anxiety.
What are some of those?
So,
do they actually work?
The text advocates for a combination of mental and physical preparation.
Okay, that makes sense.
And they suggest techniques like visualization. Where you mentally rehearse your performance.
And imagine yourself succeeding.
Got it.
And connecting with the audience.
So it's like giving yourself a mental pep talk.
It's like a mental pep talk.
With a killer soundtrack.
With a soundtrack.
Yeah, and a standing ovation in your head.
A standing ovation.
I like that.
The text also emphasizes the importance of physical warm-ups.
Physical warm-ups.
Yeah, to help release tension and calm those pre-performance jitters.
So like stretching.
Or
maybe even like doing a little dance.
Yeah, whatever gets you moving.
And get the blood flowing.
And feeling energized. It even recommends power posing. Power posing.
I think so. Remind me.
So power posing involves striking these confident postures to boost your self-assurance.
Wait, so you telling me that standing like a superhero can actually make me feel more confident on stage?
It might sound strange.
It does sound a little strange.
But there's actually research that suggests that our body language can influence our thoughts and feelings.
So by adapting these...
So if you stand tall and open up your posture, you might actually start to feel more confident.
So digitally, fake it till you make it.
Exactly.
Fake it till you make it, but with your body.
I can dig it.
I like that.
So besides power posing, what else does the text recommend? Well, they also recommend breathing exercises and mindfulness techniques.
To help manage that anxiety.
Exactly. To help you manage that anxiety and stay present in the moment.
So it's not just about psyching yourself up. It's also about finding that inner calm.
Exactly. It's about finding that...
amidst all the chaos.
Stillness amidst the storm of pre-performance nerves.
I like that.
They argue that by mastering your breath and quieting those racing thoughts... you can access this state of focus and presence.
That makes a lot of sense.
That allows you to perform at your best.
Right. So I'm starting to see how these techniques could be helpful, even if you're not trying to
you don't have to
win a verbal war on stage.
A warrior poet to benefit from these techniques.
Exactly. But let's be real. Sometimes fear can just feel like this relentless opponent.
It can be tough, no matter how many power poses you strike.
It can feel overwhelming sometimes. And the text actually acknowledges that fear is a natural human emotion. And we can't always completely eliminate it. We can't just shut it off.
We can't just shut it off.
So what are we supposed to do?
Well,
if we can't get rid of it.
They encourage us to reframe our relationship with foul.
Reframe it.
Yeah, instead of seeing it as this enemy that needs to be defeated, try to see it as a signal.
The signal.
That you're stepping outside your comfort zone.
Interesting.
That you're challenging yourself to grow.
Okay, so instead of letting it paralyze us, we can actually use it.
Use it as fuel to push yourself further and achieve something truly remarkable.
So it's about turning fear into a superpower.
I love that, turning fear.
Instead of letting it hold us back.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's a great way to think about it.
That's actually really inspiring.
It is.
Right, but before we get too carried away...
Before we get too carried away...
With our newfound fear-fighting abilities...
Right.
Let's bring our attention back to Winston Churchill.
Back to Churchill in the bathtub.
Yes, the source material's star player.
The bathtub warrior.
What can we actually learn?
What can we learn?
From his bathtub escapades?
Well, besides the obvious, Lehan.
What's that?
About the importance of having a good bathtub.
That's very important.
It is.
Churchill's story reminds us. That
even under immense pressure, we have the power.
We have the power
to choose how we respond to fear.
If Churchill can lead a nation from his bubble bath. During a bombing raid.
No less.
Yeah. Then we can probably handle a little stage fright.
A little stage fright.
Right.
Churchill's example really highlights
it's all about
the importance of resilience, adaptability, and maybe even a touch of humor.
Oh, that's good.
In the face of adversity.
So when those pre-performance jitters...
Yeah, when those jitters start creeping in. Just channel your inner Churchill.
Channel my inner Churchill.
Picture yourself in that luxurious bathtub.
And tell fear.
And just tell fear.
Just take a hike.
I love it. And remember, even the most eloquent wordsmiths and captivating performers...
They've all been there.
...have experienced those moments of doubt and fear.
So we're all in this together.
We're all in the same
bath club, so to speak.
We are.
And so sometimes the best way to conquer those fears...
Sometimes the best way...
is to just embrace the absurdity of it all.
Embrace the absurdity.
Yeah, and add a dash of humor.
A dash of humor can be such a powerful antidote to fear.
It can.
Sometimes the best way to disarm those anxieties is to just acknowledge them with a wink and a smile.
All right, so
let's shift gears a bit.
Yeah, let's dive a little deeper.
Let's expand
into the practical techniques.
Some of the more practical advice
that are offered in Poetry Master. What exactly does this self-proclaimed guy
to
verbal
warfare recommend for aspiring poets?
Well,
what kind of verbal weapons are we talking about?
They dive into a variety of techniques.
Okay. Some more helpful than others.
Of course.
But one of the core concepts that they emphasize is the importance of word choice.
Okay, word choice.
And imagery.
So ditch the cliches. Name for words that pack a punch.
Exactly. They encourage poets to use language that is vivid, evocative, and emotionally charged.
So basically turn words into musical instruments.
Yes. Think about the sounds of the words, the rhythm and flows language, and how these elements can contribute to the overall impact of a performance.
Yeah, a symphony of emotions and ideas.
I love that analogy.
And then the book also gets into the importance of storytelling.
And
structure.
So it's not just about stringing together.
It encourages poets to...
Pretty words.
Yeah, to craft narratives. That are compelling.
Relatable, and emotionally resonant,
yeah. So it's like writing a mini-movie for the ears. Complete with plot twists. Dramatic climax.
And maybe even a tear-jerking ending.
Exactly.
So while the language might be a bit over the top at times, I think the emphasis on storytelling and emotional connection.
Right? Because that's what poetry...
at its core is all about.
That poetry at its core is about sharing human experiences.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how...
Yeah.
Poetry Master, despite its somewhat aggressive marketing, actually offers some solid advice for aspiring poets.
It's not just about being a lyrical warrior. It's about crafting words that move people, evoke emotions.
And leave a lasting impact.
That's
a great way to summarize it. So I think that's a key takeaway from our deep dive today.
What's that?
Whether you're facing a blank page, or a metaphorical bathtub during a bombing raid.
Churchill's bathtub.
The most important weapon in your arsenal is the power of your own voice.
The power of your own voice.
Well said.
And with that, I think we've reached the end.
The end of our deep dive.
Into
this wild and wacky world.
Into the wild world of performance.
Fear.
And the power of language.
Yeah, the power of language. So as we kind of come up for air from this deep dive into the world of performance and fear and the power of language.
We have.
What are some key takeaways?
Good question.
That you think our listeners should hold on to?
Well, first off, I think we've got to remember that fear is a sneaky little beast.
Oh, it is.
Always lurking in the shadows, ready to pounce when we least expect it. But the good news is...
the good news.
We don't have to let it rule the show.
We don't have to let it control it.
We have the power.
Take back. And we've seen how even a titan like Churchill...
facing a war zone.
Facing incredible pressure, found a way to manage that fear and keep moving forward.
He didn't let it stop him.
He didn't.
And, even this poetry master approach with its whole talk back to fear strategy.
Right. That was an interesting one.
Offers some pretty practical tools.
Yeah, I was surprised.
For taming those inner demons.
By how much I actually liked that approach.
It's like giving fear a good verbal smackdown.
Giving fear a smack.
Showing it who's boss.
I like.
But as we discussed,
it's
not just about brute force.
It's not just about.
It's about finding your own unique voice.
Finding your own voice.
Your own style.
Own style.
And connecting with your audience.
Yeah.
Authentically.
Authentically connecting.
And sometimes that means pushing ourselves. Outside of our comfort zone.
Outside of that comfort zone.
Taking risks.
And
embracing the challenge.
Even
when fear is whispering doubts in our ears.
Even when those doubts are creeping in.
And that's where I think Poetry Master, despite its sometimes over-the-top language.
Aggressive language.
Really has something valuable to offer.
I think so too.
It encourages us to hone our craft.
To experiment with language.
To play with words.
To find the words that ignite our passions.
And spark a fire in our listeners.
That's a great way to put it.
So it's not just about being a lyrical warrior.
Right.
It's about being a master storyteller.
Being a storyteller. A weaver of words.
A weaver of words.
A conductor of emotions.
Using
language to build bridges.
Building bridges.
Not burn them down.
I like that.
I do too.
And I think
that's a really powerful message to carry with us. Whatever. We're aspiring poets, seasoned performers, or simply navigating the ups and downs.
The ups and downs of everyday life.
All
right, so to wrap things up, let's revisit that book recommendation.
One last time.
Just
in case our listeners want to explore those verbal warfare tactics.
Explore those tactics for themselves. So if you're intrigued by this unique approach.
For
poetry and performance.
Be
sure to check out the book.
Poesycraft and Seventh Haven.
And remember, even if you don't buy into, if you don't buy word killer mentality.
Buy into that whole thing.
There's still a lot to be gained. Exploring different approaches. To creative expression.
Different approaches.
The key is to find what works for you. To experiment. To play with language. And most importantly. To never be afraid. To let the voice be heard. Well said. All right. So it's time to bring this deep dive. To a close. But before we go. I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
A final thought to ponder.
All
right, I'm ready.
We've talked a lot about this verbal warfare metaphor.
That metaphor.
And the idea of using language as a weapon. But I wonder. Does that kind of aggressive mindset ultimately limit our creative potential?
That's an excellent point.
Does focusing on winning? Or conquering our audience prevent us from fully embracing the vulnerability? that often lie at the heart of.
And the authenticity that are truly great art.
Something to think about. Definitely something to think about.
For sure.
All right, so with that, I think it's time.
Time to say goodbye.
Until next time.
Be
creative, Stefan. Peace out.